Hello, it's a pleasure to be here with you today at the Big Five Digital Festival of Construction, focusing on work in Africa. My name is Dan Ringelstein. I'm the Director of City Design for Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. I'm based out of our London office, but we have practices all over the world, and we're a practice of 1,400 people, design-led practice, and within that practice, there's over 100 of us who are really focused on and passionate about cities. And I'm pleased today to share with you some of our most recent work in sub-Saharan Africa. It is a new market for us, and we've been really pleased to have the opportunity to sort of work on 4 very interesting projects of similar character, which I'll walk you through, and also understand some of the lessons learned from other international work that we've had at similar scales to bring it to the African continent. So with that, I will just move right along. So today I'm really just focusing on our recent work in the region and sort of the things that we've been learning as we go. We've been working now for the past 4 years in 3 countries on 4 projects. So in Nairobi, in Kenya, 2 projects in Nigeria, and 1 project in Ghana. All these projects have actually been led by the same client, Rendeavor, who are a relatively new company, up and coming company. And they have found some amazing opportunities outside of many of the major cities on the continent. And I think their great sort of mantra is really to work with local communities, work with local governments to deliver new city developments on the periphery of these major cities. And they are also really thinking about the social dynamics of what they're building, and they're building fully inclusive communities, work, as well as live, as well as play. So it's been tremendous to help support them on these projects. So I'm going to walk through really quickly 4 case studies, but then more focus on the themes that we find common between all these projects. And just to give you a sense of scale, these are all potentially, greenfield projects on the outskirts of these cities of about 1,000 to 2,000 hectares in size, similar to, if you know, central London, the city of London, the square mile, as it's known. The first project here is in Ghana, and it's on the outskirts of the city. Again, a new community, primarily housing with a mixed-use core and also some light industrial land located to the north of Accra, on the outskirts of the city. As in most of these projects, we are engaging in a very interesting natural rural landscape in many cases, so we try to be shepherds of the local site and understand the natural systems that can help frame our projects. And these really end up shaping the plan from a 2-dimensional point of view, but also understanding how the landscape can be harnessed to create value in a more 3-dimensional way, to create places for people to come together. And we're using these greenway corridors to not only manage water, but also to create linear park spaces to bring people together in these new places. We have to create a there, particularly in these out of city center projects. So we use these green spaces as a way to build community. The second project is in Abuja and in the capital city of Nigeria, again, outside the city center in a much more sensitive landscape environment. So again, this is an expansion of the city to the north, and a pretty amazing site that's really within the foothills, not of the mountains, but incredible topography surrounding the site. And this site, if I just go back one, this site is really one of tremendous environmental interest, with granite domes that were created in prehistoric times that are revealed to us, tremendous valleys and natural landscapes. Some of this land is being grazed with pastures, but most of it is native untouched land. So in this case, we really wanted to plan in a very sensitive way, really from a bottom-up point of view. So where would you want to find development in this sort of incredible, these valleys and these peaks and valleys within the site, and sort of a top-down approach. So the plan isn't really sort of a formal top-down idea at all. This is the result of that kind of approach of working with the land to understand appropriate places to build and where not to build. And this is sort of the results. It's a series of communities that find their way to coalesce within little neighborhoods around the city center. And each one has this direct connection with the natural landscape and the water courses that really flow through it. We would try to make sure that we're protecting these ecosystems. And even when we design an individual neighborhood, again, working with the topography, whether it be cross slopes or longitudinal slopes, to find streets and neighborhood spaces that necklace themselves into this very intriguing natural environment. The third project is called Alaro City, again in Nigeria, on the outskirts of Lagos. And this project really helps support the future growth of Lagos, which is expanding tremendously as sort of the major cosmopolitan city of the country on the coast. Again, this is a mixed-use project with housing, but also a tremendous amount of industrial land, which will take advantage of its strategic location between the future port, which you can see here at the east, and the future international airport in blue. It's about 50 kilometers to the east of central Lagos, and the whole Lekki Peninsula, as it's called here, is really seen as a future growth zone of this sub-region within Nigeria. And our project really we see as this new city center. So our project is the boundary shown in red here on the left. And but we wanted to also make sure before we began to master plan this, have a wider vision for the wider area, which really had not yet been developed at any rigor. So we were able to talk with the city government to understand the potential to build up a piece of a much larger plan that's coordinated at a larger scale. Again, here we have very sensitive natural environments, in this case, very low-lying flat land with potential for risk of sea level rise and flooding. So the natural courses of the green spaces that were there today really drove through and sort of broke apart the simple grid of the city that we developed here. Again, the basic economic driver of this project is the industrial zone. So we were also thinking about what is the future of contemporary modern industry to also create local jobs. And obviously some of it's sort of harder space, industrial space, but also some of it is going to be in the future cleaner industrial space where the making of the things is done in a much quieter and much more conducive environment for people. And the fourth project we've been working on is in Nairobi, called Tattoo City, located to the north of the city center. Again, and this is more in an affluent area, but again on the outskirts of urbanization. It was a former coffee plantation, so there are obviously man-made interventions that happened here, but there's still a lot of tremendous assets in terms of the natural landscape to plan the city around. So this project is now up to 2,000 hectares, and we were planning the central CBD, and we've also been looking at some of the neighborhoods around the CBD. And this project was really focusing on how to deliver a mixed-use core over the long term that could be a bit more dense to provide for really a new civic center for this part of greater Nairobi. And again, I'll sort of focus on natural open space, but also this core of the city which had an intensive retail program. We wanted to make it feel much more outdoor and engaging in this incredible climate. It has the same climate profile as Santa Monica, California, in terms of access to sun and cool breezes. So we tried to embrace that to form a new model of retail, and also find elements of the landscape which are pretty phenomenal in terms of this, for example, a magumo tree, which is a ceremonial tree, incredible scale and size to make that feature in one of the neighborhood parks. So really that's just an overview of the projects. Now I'll just go through some of the common themes that sort of drive our work across all these projects. Obviously, Sub-Saharan Africa, like many emerging markets around the world, has a lot of issues to deal with. Previous to working in Africa, we were doing a lot of work in Southeast Asia, and it's quite uncanny how those challenges are parallel. It's really about infrastructure, how to deal with rapid urbanization, what is appropriate density, how to provide a wide range of affordable housing, how to deal with climate change, and in this case, a heck of a lot of stormwater that's coming onto these sites, but also really building community, addressing the very colorful cultures there in each of these different places, and also building talent. The population curve of these countries is such that the majority of the population is a very young age, 20, 27 years old on average. So this really is about building the future. So this next section of the presentation is organized in these different themes, and I'll walk you through each one and how they kind of led our work in all the projects. The first one's about really working with the land. And as I said earlier in this project in Abuja, we had to really undertake a three-dimensional analysis of the constraints that we felt added value to the place. So the watercourses, the granite domes, the incredible peaks on these valleys, these valleys, and then come up with a residual plan for where you could build. So the strategy here, again, was to build in the valleys, not on the peaks. And that way, development could really nestle into these lower areas and be hidden from view from many different places. So for this project, we really had to understand the three-dimensional topography in a very detailed way. So we built a very intense three-dimensional terrain model, which helped us zoom in different areas of the site and different valleys and different peaks to understand where best to find intensities development and able to guide the plan in a much more responsible way. Then when we got to the neighborhood scale, we had to continue to think about the topography and organize streets and parcels with topography so that there was a least intrusive way of building these neighborhoods within the existing landscape. In a similar way, the project in Accra, Apollonia, now the topography here wasn't as acute as the one in Abuja, but still there was tremendous value in understanding, where were the peaks, where were the valleys. In this case, we actually encouraged the client to readjust the previous plan to put the heart of the city up on top of the plateau with great views down into the lower valleys. It also helped to manage rainwater, channeling the rainwater from the neighborhoods into that greenway. And then the whole central focus of the project turned into this crescent shape of the downtown area of the town center of the project that gives it its identity. And again, it's driven directly by the nature of the site that's there today. Another principle we've been employing, because these are all sustainable mixed-use communities, is we need to provide a series of different centers that work at a different series of levels. So not only are we designing the town center at the heart of these communities, we're also designing neighborhood centers that sort of find their way throughout the rest of the sites. Each neighborhood is based on a 3 to 5 minute walk, in the center of which you would have a community amenity, a green space, a playground, etc., so that you don't have to walk all the way into the center. Then obviously, if we have in their center a retail and workplace, we're not traveling as well into the center of the main city either, so it's helping to keep people locally. And each of the projects sort of drive forward that principle and are based on that principle of centers. And here's some examples of how that plays out in terms of different clusters of development. Even though each neighborhood may have a different use focus, each one has a real clear civic center and open space and community space or community program in those neighborhoods. So within that, obviously, as I mentioned, each city that we're developing does have a clear town center. So here we've revved up the urbanism, we've revved up the density, we've revved up the level of mixity, which I think is really important for these suburban kinds of developments. I think the most successful ones that we're seeing in the Western world sort of function along these lines. And many of the more traditional sort of rail suburbs or memorable places outside of city centers in the Western world carry this sort of same principle. So here at Tattoo City, again, it was about raising the density, providing for even longer term vision that maybe even get to a much higher density with intensive retail, mixed-use hospitality, housing in and on top of the retail instead of it being separate zones like it traditionally is in these places, to create a there. In Abuja, the town center was much smaller. It's almost, I would call it a village center. It's a main street, a few blocks long with some housing at a higher density alongside. Obviously, the environment was more sensitive, so the level of intensity was lower, but again, still creating that urbanity at a certain level. So we also want to make sure there's diversity and that we kind of want to get away from the cookie cutter approach to development. We also see sometimes in these sort of out of city environments. So a variety of different development typologies. So what's great about the Rendeavor mix in terms of developer program is it is this great mix of workplace and of living and of other commercial activities. And that drives urban form and planning in many different ways. But also making sure we're ensuring the amount of green space that each of these places need, each of these uses need to kind of survive in a more sustainable way. And so the project at Alaro City, I think, comes together in this image quite well in terms of showing residential areas, this TBD on the right, the industrial and commercial areas in the foreground, all connected to this green system that links to the lagoon and to the sea. Within housing as well, we're working with the clients and their marketing teams that have a very specific mix of typologies of housing that they're selling, whether it be single family, whether it be townhouses, whether it be flatted accommodation, and really creating the street as the thing that identifies the market, not the product. So again, a placemaking approach to organizing where the different development products are allocated in a neighborhood. And that can then plays out at larger scales, neighborhood scales, to create places. So you have a center of the community, the center of a neighborhood that's clearly defined by density or by use. And the streets that sort of fan out from there have a similar character. All of our projects are obviously also promoting walkability. That's one of the great things about sub-Saharan Africa, that people are walking everywhere. So there already is this cultural acceptance to walking, even in some tough climatic conditions. So we just want to make those environments better. So making sure there's a network of walkable streets, a network of cycle lanes, attractive amenities to get to within a short distance, as I mentioned previously, all supporting this principle. And then the urban form as well needs to support pedestrian activity so these streets feel comfortable. So we're not talking about high-rise development, we're not talking about, streets for cars, but streets for people, and sort of the building fabric that shapes these spaces in a very comfortable scale. And then when we get to some big projects where we also trying to challenge the sense of a retail mall, which always tends to be sort of the first go-to solution for shopping there. And we're promoting much more of a district experience, much more multiple choices of routes, a more urban sense of discovery and excitement, which I think is the future of retail versus sort of the enclosed shopping mall. And so everything we're doing is trying to promote that in terms of an active ground floor frontage, space for people, shading, landscape, and variety and diversity in the architecture. So when we come to a project, often many of the project roads are already been designed, so we have to come in and try to retrofit these. There's always this need to and sense that people think that we have to widen our streets and create through traffic and efficient traffic, so people are working against sort of combating congestion, where we think actually congestion is a good thing from an urbanity point of view. So really, again, trying to create streets versus major roadways so that people have just as much a priority here as the automobile. So this is about developing ideas of good boulevards, avenues. So we talk about these things in that sort of language versus a street versus a road or roadway or highway. Landscape plays a key role, so we're champions of making sure these are green streets because it provides shade and efficient sort of places for people to cross from one side of the street to another. So all of our projects have a series of street sections that describe the full hierarchy from the largest street right away all the way down to sort of a neighborhood lane to give guidance to the infrastructure designers of these places as to what the intentions really should be. And also the traffic planners understand how we can manage the flows and the turning movements at intersections, et cetera. As I said, in some cases, we come to the game where the road has already been built, and sometimes we can't change its system, but we can change its character. So in this project in Apollonia, we've been encouraging the client to really think about development that frames these streets, that the boulevard is not just for getting through the city, but also it's an address, it's a great address, and has high value for commercial or residential real estate, and it's a great place for people to come. So trying to mitigate the issues of fast, free-flowing traffic into more urban avenues and boulevards, even in a retrofit. And as I may have said earlier, the principle of creating great streets in neighborhoods, in some places, these are places where children play. So they should be safe places as well as movement of vehicles and making sure that there's the proper distance and space for that kind of informal activity to take place. And of course, besides walkability and creating streets, we're also promoting public transport. And again, there's a great already local use of, I would say, informal transit and mass transit. And I think that that's one of the key critical elements as these cities intensify and continue to grow. And what we've been promoting in our projects is to extend that system into our communities so that there's a clear network and hierarchy of multiple kinds of formal and informal transit that can really structure these plans. And the stops and the corridors for those can be interwoven within urban activity. So we've organized bus corridors, cycle corridors, and just incorporate in a great urban avenue, just like we see in most of our Western cities or more developed cities. As I mentioned earlier, another key component of our thinking is the landscape and the management of water. But we're not just moving water, we're trying to use it as a value add. And so we've been actually able to convince this client to get away from putting everything in a pipe and to actually daylight these systems, because they provide for a wonderful amenity space, and it's really much more sustainable in terms of capturing, cleansing, and then releasing water. Yes, there's always an issue of stagnant water and an issue of some and clean water issues, but I think as these communities grow over time, as we've seen in the developing world, these management systems are very easy to actually arrive at, and they can become these wonderful spaces that animate parkland and sort of linear garden space. So each of our projects has a clear stormwater strategy in terms of the flow of water and how that feeds into the natural landscape, and actually can then recharge as well some of the local water bodies that would otherwise maybe have a negative impact if everything went sort of pipes and drains. And the landscape is a performative landscape, so it can actually we design it in such a way that it can handle the big moments on the right, but also still have a trickle of water when it's not raining, so that the movement of water continues. And so these are the strategies that we've been employing, and we're going to start seeing the first constructed elements of this happening very soon in these projects. The next theme is really about building equitable communities, about placemaking, but also providing, so placemaking in terms of bringing people together, whether it be a market space, a market square, whether it be a school playground. These are important aspects that we feed into the community that structure these plans. So again, this client is really forward thinking in terms of bringing in partnerships with school developers and school entities, and they're building schools first before they build housing. So they understand that in order to build a new community, you have to create a place for families to be attracted to come to, and then the schools and other civic components are really required. So the hospitals, the police and fire facilities all have to be provided at the same time. So that's part of the planning as well. And again, each neighborhood, as I said, each phase of neighborhood usually has a school component as well. And that component is sort of developed over time, one by one. So a neighborhood is completed as they go forward to the next neighborhood. And some of the housing is at higher density scale, so flatted housing, and some of the housing is at a smaller scale, sort of individual villas. And we've been working with the client to set out a series of guidelines that really tries to push the aspirations in terms of contemporary design in housing, but using local and sustainable materials to reflect the character of the place in these various locations. And again, I mentioned, we have a lot to learn. We are not from Africa, and we really look to the teams on the client team that are from these places. They have a great sort of collection of local talent on the developer side, who's helping us understand, what it's like to be in these places, what's important to the people who are there. And it's very different from one country to the other. So we're trying to integrate, at least in spirit, that sort of vibrancy into our work, and sort of celebrating art, celebrating colorful moments that can come into civic life, and that can really infuse the development of the public realm and even into the architecture of buildings. So again, in a very contemporary designed way. So that can find its way into obviously not just horizontal public space, in public realm, but also the way in which the vertical realm is treated, whether it be artistic insertions or whether it be the facades of buildings, finding these moments to celebrate that sort of that color and delight. And again, that's sort of being fed into our guidelines again for maybe the more higher density projects or the commercial projects as well as the residential. So I think with that, I will wrap this up. I'm very pleased to have been able to share our experience and our delight to have been invited to sort of bring our international expertise, but apply it in a very local and sustainable way in this new context that we're really learning more and more about every day. And we really see a bright future and cultures and peoples who are really looking to push forward, to innovate, to do the right thing, and to really help really define their urban futures going forward. Thank you very much.